Hey everyone, welcome back to At the Coffee Table podcast. This is episode 78. I am Jason Klink, your host. Today I am joined by Tony Callisto, and Tony is everything law enforcement in my mind. But his bio, um, Tony is a criminal justice, safety and security, organizational development, and labor relations consultant. Tony spent a majority of his life in law enforcement, ending his career as chief of law enforcement at Syracuse University. He's trained many law enforcement officers, emergency response personnel, emergency services personnel, and he's built a career over many decades that dealt with organizational and leadership development. Tony, thank you for joining me here today. Really appreciate it. I know it's early where you are on the other side of the country.
Making my way back, Jason.
Make,
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I'm currently in a nice little RV resort in Arizona, where we expect it to be about 72 degrees today.
Oh, even better. Even better, escaping the winter and the cold. So Tony, with the environment, and I'm going to kind of jump right in here with the environment, the way it's been over the last couple of years, and how a lot of organizations have had to pivot, have had to completely reinvent themselves. It really speaks to how strong is the leadership and how do we cultivate that leadership moving forward. What have been, I guess we'll call it, what have been some of the paradigm shifts that you've seen in the last couple of years with the organizations you've been working with?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially when we think about what's going on in the country, what's going on in um, public service, and specifically what's going on with public sentiment around policing and law enforcement. There's been a significant change with regards to what people see the police as, and the level of general respect or disrespect that law enforcement agencies experience, and the need, the real need, to be responsive to the demand for change.
Right.
You think about it, we're in an era where the words "defund the police" have become an anchor
Right.
for a demand for change. And what does that even mean?
Right.
When you think about that, with the defund the police, what does that mean to you, Jason? What pops into your head when you hear those terms?
Nothing good.
Yeah,
Nothing good at all. Because to me, you know, you're taking away from you're taking away from the safety and security of the population or the neighborhoods, the areas that they're sworn to protect. You're taking away tools and equipment out of the hands of these officers to effectively do their job. And you know, people can be on one side of the aisle or the other, have one opinion one way or the other, and that's fine. But I have been fortunate enough to work with and support some great police officers over the years. And is there a bad apple every now and again? Absolutely. Who doesn't have that in
right.
any organization? But for the most part, these people that put on the badge, put on the uniform, care so much that they go and put themselves in harm's way every single day.
No, yeah, and I think you offer the sentiment of likely the vast majority of people in the country,
Yeah.
um, and but the reality for some other folks is they don't have that view of law enforcement. And they don't have that view of law enforcement because their life experience, their community experience is
Right.
different than yours.
Yeah.
And so so for communities in poverty, communities of color, communities where there's a significant minority representation and a very minimal number of minority law enforcement officers, for them, the experience with law enforcement, whether it is a daily real experience or it's a perceived experience based on accounts of others or based on media accounts, but the experience nonetheless is one of an oppressive organization that doesn't represent the safety that you and I might feel and experience as members of law enforcement, fire, emergency service community. I mean,
Yeah.
we see that, we see the good work of the good folks,
Yep.
and we feel the good work. And um, so the leadership of the 21st century, the leadership of the last 3 years, last 5 years, in government and law enforcement actually has to be responsive to both,
Yes.
to those communities and those folks that have a sense of a feeling that the law enforcement officers are there to protect them and serve them, and that they feel safe in their community because of police. And
Hmm.
we have to be responsive to folks who feel that their community is unsafe because of police.
Yeah.
The word safety used to mean something very different than what it means today, and so the word safety for some communities is being safe from what they see as oppressive government intrusion into their lives,
Right.
and so so leadership. What do we do about that? That's really the cornerstone question for law enforcement leaders today, for police chiefs, especially in urban settings, and police chiefs in suburbs that surround urban settings, where there are real concerns with regards to what happens with police. And one incident can easily be seen through a couple of different lenses,
Right.
especially when there's violence.
Yes.
So recent incidences involving um, law enforcement officers engaging in deadly force during a no-knock warrant, and a person inside completely unrelated to the warrant. They just happen to be present, but they might be even a lawful firearm owner. Um, don't view the police entry as uh, as a as what you and I might think it is. They're
Right.
going to go in, they're going to do a search warrant or an arrest warrant, but they might view it as an intrusion into a house that they may be sleeping in, and all
Sure.
of a sudden that person points a gun at a police officer, and that police officer is going to shoot them.
Yep.
That incident, from folks who are first responders, folks from communities where they don't experience the level of violence that other communities might experience, might be seen and would be seen as a lawful and appropriate use of force, and an unfortunate incident where folks who live in that community might see that incident um, as as an unreasonable, unlawful, excessive use of force
Right.
by police against the community member,
Right.
and that's where we have protests and ultimately um, uh, real challenges in the community. So, thinking and rethinking and reimagining what law enforcement is and does is a big part of what 21st century law enforcement leaders are doing today, and
Yep.
it's because it's necessary, because there's a focal point and a lens on what might be lawful versus what might be acceptable to the community,
Yeah.
and so it now takes vision,
Yes.
and so when we think about vision, even the term vision and what vision is, um, as a leader, part of my responsibility over the years was to inspire a vision,
Mm.
it was to articulate with clarity,
Right.
what that new vision is, and a vision is really a future state. We're not there yet. We're going to be there, and here's what that state is. And the best leaders really do their best reflective listening with people in their community,
Hmm.
people in their law enforcement agency,
Yep.
people from the union that represents the officers,
Yep.
people from the that are responsible to legislate law, and others in the first responder community. Really, a kind of a global view. I want to engage and respectfully listen to people as a leader, to then be able to articulate what might be a shared vision.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So that
It,
that yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
I was gonna say, and that's when you talk about sharing a vision and creating a vision and getting total buy-in and making sure it's well communicated to everybody involved in the process. Um, I've seen some places where it's just that's difficult. Usually it's this is what we're doing. That's it, black and white, end of story.
Right.
Instead of here's the vision we're going to create. This is the appearance that we're going to present forward, and this is going to be accepted and communicated to everybody involved. And what I was thinking while you were talking too is, it kind of piggybacking off of that, is there's been such a mass exodus, and not only law enforcement, but police, fire, EMS, 911. There's been a mass exodus. People hitting their 20 years and getting out because they can retire, or they're getting to 15, 16 years and going, you know what, I don't want to work another 15 or 16 years. I'm going to go do something else that's going to pay me a lot more money with a lot less hassle. And, you know, to me, there has to be that paradigm shift of leadership in order to stop that bleeding of personnel, that are leaving, that have a ton of experience, maybe a ton of education. And like here locally, that's, you know, that kind of shift has been very slow to come by. And there's, you know, I've talked to public safety agencies across the country that are all saying the same thing. We're at 50% staffing, we're at 40% staffing, and, you know, we just don't know how to get more people.
Yeah. So, you know, we're in a time where law enforcement, certainly more than EMS, and significantly more than fire service, is experiencing not only a significant bleed, but also a pretty significant lack of interest. And a lot of that is driven certainly by the defund rhetoric, and the feeling that policing is no longer a noble career. That that you know, who wants to put themselves in harm's way for others, and who wants to put their livelihood on the line on every call. Every call has the potential to be the call that you end up you know, engaged in an activity that you were trained to do in a way that you were trained to do it, but that there's a bad result, and ultimately you're vilified in the community. So that's the vision today for what law enforcement is, as it's been articulated by the media and by certainly some political leaders at every level of government, and so and by community activists. So again, leaders in law enforcement have to be responsive to that, and you know, some would say, well, you got to push back on that narrative, and I say, no, you know what, we've got to embrace the reality of that narrative, understand what it means, understand why it's important to a significant number of people in communities around the country, and what we need to do about it, while also truly loving the people that are in our organization, and truly supporting them, which is a difficult balance. You know, you think about it. How do you, when a bad thing happens as a law enforcement leader, how do you communicate to the public when there's anger and rage in the public about what happened, and to your own agency, who believes that you're going to be selling them out, even if the person followed policy, procedure, practice. And so, you know, leaders have an obligation to walk that thin line. You know, one of the best people in the local Syracuse community that has done that in recent years, a wonderful friend and a colleague of mine that I love, Frank Fowler.
I was just going to bring that up. That up.
Jason, he was absolutely genuine with regards to his commitment to the community.
For sure.
He had he long before there were any incidences, Frank, as a sergeant, as a police officer, but then as a sergeant in community relations, as the deputy chief of community relations, and ultimately as the police chief for many, many years in Syracuse, Frank was Syracuse. He was the community.
Oh yeah.
He engaged the community.
Yep.
He met with and worked with the religious community, the faith community in the city of Syracuse, with the activist community in the city of Syracuse, and ultimately with the with political leaders and others in the city. But equally important, Frank was a cop's cop from the day he started to the day he retired. And so he didn't 100% agree, and never, he didn't fail to engage in discipline when it was appropriate.
Right.
Frank terminated people that need to be terminated. He presided over incidences where his own officers might have been arrested and
Yep.
prosecuted for
Yep.
a couple of incidents. But there was those small ball bad apple incidences. Really, people in the union understood it. People that worked for the agency understood it, and the community appreciated it. He got it, and he
Yes.
articulated a vision of a safe community
Yep.
where he exuded professionalism and exuded a sense of respect from the community,
Yep.
that he worked hard to gather steam around his officers in that way, and that's the kind of leadership that is powerful and effective. It is incredibly tiring, and
Yeah.
I join in congratulating him on his retirement a few years back, because that was well deserved and well earned.
For
But
sure.
we need more leaders like Frank in every aspect of the community,
Yeah.
every aspect of public safety, and every aspect of business, to step up and be leaders in tough times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true, because all across the board right now, we need strong leaders all across the board. We need people to step up and lead from all angles. I'd love to see leaders that lead from all angles. When I was fire chief, I tried to do that, and what I tried to do was show the guys and girls that I wasn't afraid to do the. If I'm going to expect them to do the work, I wasn't afraid to do the work. And I can remember one time, we had whatever incident it was, and we were loading hose, and I jumped up on the back of the pumper and I started loading hose, and I had a more senior member going, "What are you doing?" I go, "Loading the hose." He's like, "Oh, I thought once you got a white hat, you didn't have to. You forgot how to do that anymore." I go, "No, I didn't. I'm very capable, thanks, and let's get this done." But when you see and I have worked for really strong leaders that they didn't have to command respect or,
Right.
or anything like that, because they earned it with what they did and how they handled the personnel day in and day out. And they genuinely had a vested interest in everybody that was on their staff,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus really weak leaders that didn't know people's names, didn't know their background, probably
I,
didn't
I
even know they worked there until they tripped over them in the hallway or wherever it was. And you just seen the tale of two different morales versus that strong leader and that weak leader.
Yeah, so boy, you're spot on with this, Jason. And I think of the leadership successes that I had in my career.
Yeah.
I was appointed as a sergeant in the sheriff's office in 1987. Many of your viewers probably weren't even born yet. Um, so in 1987, I was 5 years on the job. I was a young guy. I was 25 years old, appointed as a sergeant. And I was responsible for folks, in the unit that I had were 35 folks that, almost to a person, everybody was older than me. A
Right.
few guys about my age, and everybody else was, probably 10 years or so older than me. And I couldn't command respect. I had to earn respect.
Sure.
And I had to earn respect through three different things. One, I couldn't back away from my 5-year history. So if I didn't have a good reputation, as I walked into that job already, as a hard worker, as a go-to person, as a good partner, as
Yep.
someone who was always willing to pitch in, I'd have had a problem. So I walked into it with that reputation.
Right.
But then I also had to kind of build a new reputation as a supervisor and leader that was one of strong vision, strong leadership, but also one that was always looking out for their people. And I learned that early on, and I learned that from a lot of good leaders that I worked for.
Yeah.
Fast forward to my time as a chief deputy at the sheriff's office, and then as a chief at Syracuse University. One of the things I knew when I took those roles, and I was a chief executive from 1996 until I retired last June. 24/7 call, significant administrative responsibility during the daytime,
Right.
lots of constituents to have to engage with and be concerned about. In both organizations, lots of bosses. Yes, I reported directly to the sheriff at the sheriff's office, but I had to deal with and respectfully engage the county legislature, the county executive and budget office. At the university, there's a board of trustees.
Sure.
There's even though I ended my career as a senior vice president, I was responsive to an entire team of senior VPs, the vice chancellor and chancellor, and so the folks above me and the folks parallel to me took up a significant portion of my time. So I had to be around Monday through Friday during the daytime all the time, right?
Yep.
Well, my folks in both organizations, for the 25 years that I was in a senior executive role, worked round the clock and weekends. I could not be the kind of leader that they needed if I was only responsive to the Monday through Friday responsibilities of a chief.
Right.
And so I made an effort from the day I was appointed chief deputy at the sheriff's office to the day I retired, that every weekend and at least one late night, I'd be out in the field, meeting, talking with officers,
right.
Rolling up on the scene of an incident, rolling up on a vehicle traffic stop and being the backup for a minute, just like rolling holes, right?
Right.
Stopping into the jail and taking a walk through the facility and meeting with the folks that were ending their shift at 11 and starting the folks that were starting their shift at 11, because it was important for them to feel my presence.
Yes.
And to have an opportunity to talk to me and have an opportunity for me to share vision with them. Yep. And so an inspired shared vision is only inspired and shared when it's communal. Yes. When the leader is part of the organization in a way that people feel like they're with them.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so good. And that's really, truly, and it's something I preach all the time, is that, and I truly believe that to have that total buy-in into the mission, it has to come from the top down. So if the rank and file see that the top has complete buy-in into the mission and they're part of the mission, they're going to work just as hard or harder to try to support and promote that mission. Yeah. And it's funny while you're saying that, I was thinking of another Frank Fowler story. Is when I was dispatching, there would be times where we ran out of police cars. Yeah. Priority calls, no police cars, any unit. And there was a couple of times where I'd be on the radio and I hear car one, and I was like, what? And the chief, I'll take that. And then you watch units clear all over the place because the police chief is taking a call. But that was always, it was always fun to see, and it was good that he had and his chief's office had that finger on the pulse of what was going on every day.
Right. And you think about that simple act of at 7:00 at night or whatever, hearing car one on the radio.
Yep.
And all of a sudden the lack of availability became incredible availability, because that leadership by example led to others who, okay, I could clear this call and go on to the next one. Yep. But they weren't, because there was that vacuum for a moment. As soon as they felt that leadership presence, they stepped up, right?
Yes. Yep.
The absent leader is not going to make that happen. And that, that is really a great example of why that is so important and why it's so tiring. Yeah. Imagine the 10 years or so. I think Frank was maybe it was 12 or 13 years. He was, between his time as a deputy chief and his time as chief, it was over a decade.
Yeah.
How tiring. How tiring that is for a leader. Yep. And it's demanding. And frankly, community members and people who are part of the organization do expect that. They expect to see that. And when they don't, then there's a void in leadership, and that becomes a real challenge for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, the other thing, I just want to make one more point about all this.
Yep.
The other thing a good leader has to do in this is when they fail to do something like that. I mean, in 25 years, there were gaps. There were moments when I was too exhausted where, I would miss a couple of weeks, or I had to check out for a period of time.
Sure.
I had to be ready to apologize for that. For any other mistakes that I might have made, in leading and disciplining employees, sometimes you don't get it right, and I had to be ready to publicly apologize to the folks that work for me. I'd be ready to publicly apologize to the community as a campus law enforcement leader. There's lots of engagement and interaction with students, so I had to be ready to apologize, and then to say what I was going to be doing differently, or what our organization was going to be differently to get past the mistakes that were made.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just having the right amount of humility to be able to go, you know what, that was an incorrect decision. This is how we're going to fix it. I apologize. And it's all part. I mean, as leaders, we're always learning, we're always growing, and we're trying to do better, and trying to educate ourselves more, and making sure that we're in tune with the people that serve with us. And that kind of leads into something I wanted to bring up to you. There seems to be, and what's been kind of brought to my attention by some other industry professionals, is the generational gap. That, like, the baby boomers are on their way out, if they haven't gone out already. You have the Generation Xers that, like me, that are probably, from what I've been told, the smallest generation right now, population wise. But we're at kind of towards the tail end of our careers, heading on the way out. Then you have the millennials, who make up a majority of the workforce right now, and then the Gen Zs, who are getting ready to enter the workforce. And each generation has its own flavor, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah.
And do you see that kind of generational gap and change in generations really affecting how leaders lead?
Well, yeah, I started in the sheriff's office in 1981 when it was the veteran generation. The World War II
Oh yeah,
veterans
right,
were the folks who were in charge.
right,
John C. Dillon was the sheriff who hired me, John was Korean War era, but yeah, but the captains, the lieutenants, the folks who kind of raised me in 1981. Most of them were older than him, and folks that had served in World War II or were in law enforcement during World War II in the 1940s and 50s. It's amazing. I think
yeah,
of some of the names and faces that go by, and so we were baby boomers. I was one of the late baby boomers, and certainly as a generation, we were very different from our parents.
yeah,
Our parents grew up and were raised in the Depression era.
yep,
We were raised from plenty. After World War II, there was a boom in jobs, in the economy,
right,
in the growth of the United States,
right,
and so many of us that are baby boomers were really privileged in ways that our parents weren't. And then we, the earlier baby boomers, like my brother, who's in his mid 70s now,
okay,
all have children that are in their 40s,
right,
right, almost 50,
yep,
and so the folks in your generation,
yep,
were raised in a different way.
right,
As we kind of went through the 60s and 70s and saw significant social change,
yeah,
uh, folks in the next generation were really kind of raised differently. So that my point is, now fast forward to my kids who are in their 20s and 30s,
right,
and in building careers in the workforce. Um, the, the way folks that are currently newer to the workforce, the 20-year-olds, the millennials, there's even a newer term. The folks who were born after 2000 are
yeah,
now in their 20s and in the workforce.
right,
Um, those kids were raised in an environment where the parental influence was less significant than social influences through social media, through
oh
the
yeah,
internet. I mean, those
yeah,
things didn't exist when you think about even in your own time.
yep,
When did cell phones pop up and stuff? You were growing up. Well, my kids and kids that are younger than them coming into the workforce now, electronics and access to electronic media were instant when they were little. So
yeah,
it has a different impact on the way they view the world. So
right,
boomers like me who are kind of seen as outdated, really do still have significant impact and control over the workplace. And we have to recognize, and folks in your generation have to recognize that the folks who were raised with a lot more information, a lot more freedom and connection to the world around them,
right,
and the world beyond them
right,
through electronic connection, um, that they have a different and more diverse and more liberal view of the world and the workplace. And we have to adapt that,
Yes.
like those World War II generation veterans had
Right.
to adapt to this huge baby boomer population of folks that came in. But I'll say this: I am encouraged by the new generation. I teach every new academy recruit. Even as I retired, I went and taught the new academy at the university. Uh, I teach all new sergeants throughout Onondaga County, newly promoted or just about to be promoted, city, county, town, village. They go through a school that myself and Chief Derek Osbeck and others have led for the past decade. So we have an opportunity to engage those folks. So for 10 years, I've been teaching every sergeant that rolls out, I've had an opportunity to engage with. And what I see in the new generation of officer, the new generation of first line supervisor, I see an inspiration for the future. I see a desire to do good. I
Mm.
see an embracing and an acceptance and a celebration of diversity in ways that I haven't seen before. That is really important to kind of link back to the first part of our conversation.
Yeah.
That this new generation of leaders coming through, they will shepherd us into beyond the defund era into the reframe era. And I'm not going to say reform, I'm going to say reframe era of public service, of law enforcement, of fire service, of the MS, in that they're much more ready to look at differences as opportunities.
Mm.
Where you and I, as a chief of fire department, or chief of a law enforcement agency, might look at differences as challenges or differences as threats to our authority. Um, the newer generation looks differently at those kinds of diverse issues and embraces them in a way that can move us forward. That means you and I, if we still have leadership responsibilities in organizations,
Yep.
have to adopt a different and a new philosophy, one that is welcoming to differences and understands how to actually lead through difference by engaging folks in the organization. It's folks like you and me who've had opportunities to do this over the past 20 years, um, and if we've done it right in our own life transition, we can still lead in the environment today. Folks who are stuck in where they were 20 years ago, the good old days when they
Yeah.
started in the business, or 30
Right.
years ago when they started in the business, and the way
Right.
it used to be and what we used to be able to do. If you're a leader in an organization continually looking back to the good old days, you
Oh.
don't have vision. You're not sharing vision.
That's so
You're
good.
sharing war
Uh,
stories.
yep.
Okay? We can
Yep.
learn from the history. There's no, don't ignore history. We can
Absolutely.
learn from it, but we can't put on rose-colored glasses and look backward. We have to do it with honesty and integrity and recognize where we made mistakes and
Yep.
where our future today was created by mistakes we made in the past in some ways. And we're at where we're at and need to be able to move beyond it. I don't know if that
That's
makes
so good.
sense.
No, that's so good. That's so good because I always say, like, I was fire chief in my early 30s, and I always say, fire chief, fire chief 32 versus me if I was to be fire chief again now, would be totally different leadership styles. It would be completely different decision making processes, because I've had those life experiences in that time, and you're right. You can't just keep dwelling on and remembering everything that's already happened, because there's no way to move forward from that if you're always dwelling and worrying about what's already happened. It's like, what are we facing right now? How can we find solutions to those challenges? How do we incorporate and include everybody in making those decision making processes? It's just a different, you, me, we started in these paramilitary organizations, and it was always leadership from the top down. That was
Yeah.
it. You took your
Yeah.
direct order and you did what you were told, and if you didn't, you got disciplined. End of story. To where now you almost have the ability to lead from the back and just observe and watch as I knock things around. Observe and watch, and start picking your points of where to direct, and not give those direct orders, but say, hey, I see that you're doing this, but I think it would work better if you did that. And just give everybody that dialogue.
Yeah. So you make some really good points here. And when you think about the traditional leadership models, they're like a pyramid.
Yeah.
And so the at the top of the pyramid is the fire chief, the police chief, the sheriff,
Yep.
the CEO of the organization. At the bottom of the pyramid are the vast majority of folks who are the worker bees.
Yes. Yes.
The folks who are impacted by the top.
Yes.
And really good leadership inverts the pyramid.
Yes.
That part of turning that pyramid upside down is being able to continue to be balanced on the point of the pyramid. Think about that. Envision a pyramid, right?
Yep.
Envision a big triangle, and the level of pressure needed to be able to keep it balanced if it's upside down, and that balance happens through that leader at the bottom of the pyramid, at the point, looking up and recognizing the value, the importance, and the significance of the roles of each of the folks that go to the broader and wider scheme of that pyramid, and be able to listen effectively to them, and then to be able to offer them the kind of leadership that provides for direction that is consistent with their expectations and with the vision that's been articulated.
Yes.
So we have to have clarity of direction, but it has to be consistent with the vision and the mission. Everything needs to be driven by vision and mission, but vision and mission has to be built by community, by thinking, by a leader who doesn't just dictate, but really listens and understands what the needs of the community and the needs of those folks at the top of the big pyramid need to do. Direction's important. Consistency is what maintains that balance. Pressure from both sides really has to be through consistency. And that means as a leader, I got to make sure the folks that are above me in that pyramid are really sharing the vision.
Yep.
And that we understand each other and we have regular engagement so that there's consistency regardless of that 24-hour time frame, shift to shift, period to period, group to group, that there's consistency in the application of that direction, and that there's consequences. And it's important when we think about direction, providing that in a consistent way, that there's consequences for what happens as a result of that direction. So people that share the vision, that follow the mission, engage the mission, and follow direction, they're rewarded.
Yes.
And that we engage them in a way that's positive. And for folks that don't, then there has to be negative consequences. But they have to be reasonable negative consequences. So as a leader, we can't use, if our toolbox only has a hammer, we're only going to be able to deal with problems as a nail, right?
Right.
We got to have lots of tools in the toolbox to deal with challenges, to offer the consequences necessary. One of the things I used to do as a leader all the time, and right up from the beginning, right up to the end, is I learned early on, first line supervisors, lieutenants in the fire service, sergeants in the police department, they're going to see things that happen all day long, and they're going to decide what they're going to act upon, right?
Right.
Well, what they need to act upon with regards to their to the staff that they work with is for every time they see something wrong, they need to go out and look for two things right.
Yes.
So I would always say, if you're going to write a supervisor's memorandum or a counseling memo to somebody because of something that really needs to be different, something that needs to change, or you have to have some consequences. Now, right after that, go out and find two officers that are doing excellent work, doing the right thing, and you write them up. For every piece of paper that's negative, as a leader, I should see coming across my desk two pieces of paper that are commendation in nature.
That's awesome.
If we do that, we build the consistency of that inverted pyramid in a way that people at the top of the pyramid, the ones that are actually getting the work done, recognize and feel that leadership has their back. And they're supported. And so as we circle back to the defund era, I got to be able to do that as a law enforcement leader for the folks that work in my organization, in a way that the community recognizes I'm just and fair. Also, that the consequences are real when there's a real problem too. Okay, if I can do that, I can lead in that way. And this lends itself to labor negotiations, how we engage our union, how we try to support folks while we do have an obligation to manage a
Mhm.
budget and be responsive to taxpayers.
Yep.
All of it's always about balance. And if you can find the right balance, you can actually last for 40 years in a career and be able to walk out of the end of it with your head high, like Frank Fowler did, like
Yep.
Tony Callisto did, like
Yep.
lots of my other colleagues, Lloyd Perkins, John Balone, just some, in the local community, you've had some, some really good people that I've had the pleasure and the honor to
Yes.
work with and train with and lead with and develop and write policy and procedure with, that I love as friends, but I also respect as leaders, that have all survived and thrived through careers by doing the things that we're talking about today.
That's so good. So good. And it's just, it goes back to 100% ownership of everything that we do. And, leadership or otherwise, it's 100% ownership of the good, bad, the ugly, and the indifferent of everything we do. Um,
Well, ownership is probably one of the most important words here. When
yeah.
you think of the inverted pyramid,
Yeah.
we want to inspire a feeling and a sense of ownership of the folks that are actually doing the job.
Right.
If
Right.
I have ownership, it's easy for a leader to have ownership.
Yep.
But if I carefully guard and defend my ownership as my own,
Yeah.
and don't share that power, share that ownership, I
Yeah.
lose power. I
Yeah.
lose ownership.
Right.
Because there will be informal leaders. You said this earlier, Jason.
Yep.
You like leadership that comes from all angles. Well, there's going to be informal leaders that don't hold any rank in a fire service.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I think about my two sons who are city firefighters. There's a tremendous amount of respect for Mike Mons. He's a very good leader.
Yes.
I like him a lot. And there's some firefighters that my son Jake, who's 3 years in the fire service, really has been trained well and looks up to, that don't hold a bar on their collar, but they're the
Yeah.
informal leaders of the house.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
So
The guys that own real estate in the house that they've put in their time, they've taken their knocks, but the knowledge and experience that they have is they don't need a set of collar brass to really have an influence on what's going on.
Yeah, so those leaders with collar brass, the legitimate and designated leaders, really do have an opportunity to encourage and engage leadership at all levels of the organization, especially at that top layer of the inverted pyramid where
Yep.
nobody has rank, but there's a tremendous amount of respect and
Yeah.
certainly significantly more interaction with younger, newer folks. So if I let the informal leaders who are negative leaders,
Yeah.
who are engaged always in looking backward, who are who lead people in a wrong direction. If I just let them have free reign and lead in a way that they want to, I'm probably going to have some cancer in my organization.
Yes.
So I have to look for and encourage those leaders that pop up, that have contributed to the shared vision and share that vision and always are working toward the mission. And I'm going to recognize those folks and congratulate those folks and show up for those folks. And then those folks that are good leaders but lead in the wrong direction, I've had those in my organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And some I've engaged in a lot of effort into helping them turn around.
Yes.
And to some degree, it's using the accountability systems, the consequences that might be negative, but more often, it's through actually listening to them and understanding what they see and how they see the world and how they see the organization and where it's going and how I might be able to help them see it in a different light.
That's
I
outstanding.
can actually make a change in that.
That's outstanding. And I think that's a great place to end right there. So, Tony, I appreciate your time, your insight. It's been outstanding. Everything I expected out of this conversation and more. But I wanted to allow you to connect with others. So, what's the best way for people to connect to you as they're watching this later?
Well, great. So I have a consulting firm. If you look above
There
me,
you go.
www.tonycallisto.com. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk further. The bulk of the work that my consulting firm does is around criminal justice leadership issues. I do some expert witness work in the area of criminal justice and mostly in jail and law enforcement operations. But I have an entirely separate practice around labor relations and leadership, and do training, consultations, leadership coaching, and have wonderful folks to be able to work with, like Jason Klink. And so, where there's partnership opportunities, we're going to look for those too. But
Yep.
yeah, www.tonycallisto.com. You can email me at tony@tonycallisto.com. And my phone number is 315-380-8160.
Outstanding. Great. Tony, thank you again. I appreciate your time in this early morning for you. And, I'd love to have this conversation again, no matter what the topic is. I'd love to do this again.
Sure. Pick a different topic and we'll talk for longer than we're supposed to.
There. Outstanding. All right, everyone. I hope everybody's enjoyed this. Please, drop a comment. Tell us what you think. Share it with anybody you might think would get any value out of it. And until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a great day.